Greetings, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Andrius Benokraitis, and I'm a product manager for content and certification with Ansible Automation Platform. And I will be your co-presenter for today. Our other presenter is Sean Cavanaugh. He's a senior, is it a senior principal or principal? One of those two, not senior principal. He's a kind of a big deal technical marketing manager with Ansible Automation. And on the Wheels of Steel, we've got Anshul Bell, who's going to be handling a lot of our questions. So we're just going to jump into it. We have this webinar. All this is pretty much new content, and we've entitled it "Migrating to Ansible Collections." And we're really excited to be presenting this for the first time, based on a lot of the feedback from the community and from our Ansible Automation Platform customers. But before we begin, and I'm going to read this from the paper, just so I don't screw this up, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. All participants will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. So if you have any questions during the presentation, we ask that you use the questions area of the GoToWebinar app. You can see it there on the right side where it says questions. And you can ask questions there. Anshul and I will be answering questions, and we will make many of them as public as possible. Now, we know there's going to be a lot of people on this webinar, so even if we don't get to answering your question, we hope to have our Q&A posted as a PDF or as a blog post. So if we don't get to your question in this webinar, we are going to get to it regardless, and we'll get it posted for you. So don't worry, we're not ignoring you. We just have a lot of people on here, and we have a lot to go through. So if there's time at the end of the webinar, we will try to address as many of the questions as possible. Anshul, keep track of some of the frequently asked questions, and we can answer them at the end. And last but not least, this is being recorded. So yes, we will be making this available on our training and webinar section of ansible.com, hopefully this week or next week. So without further ado, let's kick things off. Okay, so what are we going to discuss today? We're going to discuss everything around maybe a little bit. If you're not familiar with Ansible, we're going to tee up the discussions, and we're going to start talking about getting ready for Ansible Collections. And then we're going to talk about examples of using Ansible Collections in 2.9, and then moving forward, and then helping debug and troubleshoot your playbooks with collections, and then some resources and next steps. Okay, so who uses Ansible? So spoiler alert, lots of different people. And when you join a webinar, you ask yourselves, okay, well, I'm an IT ops person, which means I own the enterprise-wide automation. I own the server farms. I own the racks. I'm the one in charge of making sure all of the automation infrastructure is in place for that our enterprise organization can automate, right? So this is most likely what you've heard from if you have what was called Ansible Tower. These are the administrators that would be administering that, an enterprise-wide automation platform, including that. You may also be a platform developer, and these are the people that are the plumbers. These are the people that actually code, the Python junkies, the people that are ensuring that endpoints are automatable, right? These are the people that make sure that people can write playbooks against them. So in most cases, these could be the community, or they could be partners that actually write the content. They write plugins and modules and things like that, so that you can actually automate the endpoints directly. So, and this is what we call about content. So when we say the word content, by the way, what we mean is Ansible content is things like plugins, roles, documentation, things you would see typically that you would refer to when you're writing playbooks. And the third persona is automation implementer. And this is the one that we're actually going to be focusing on today. The automation implementer are the people that are writing the playbooks, right? These are the people that are stitching together task by task, play by play, and making sure that this is the last mile, making sure everything is actually being automated, tested, validated, based on what the developers have created. So this is the primary audience for this webinar. Don't worry, if you are an IT ops person or a platform developer, we have lots of other things that we have planned for you all specifically. But we know that with the migration, with the move to what we're going to talk about collections, is that writing playbooks is going to be changing for the better. And we hope that this guide, these are just some things to think about as you move to a collections world. So before we actually start talking about collections, what happened? So earlier this year in 2020, and we've been talking about this for about a year and a half previously, is we moved Ansible content out of the Ansible project distribution. So if you're familiar with Ansible 2.9 and 2.8 and earlier, what you would do is you would pip install Ansible and you'd get everything, right? You would get all the plugins, all the modules, everything. And this was actually great because you get everything all in one. You know, it's an easy install for users. But the problem is that there was a lot of overhead involved to actually keeping this content maintained. You had to wait like 6 to 8 months in order to get things included. And what we did was, and obviously with the help and the buy-in from the community, is to actually split out the actual foundational pieces of Ansible, which we called Ansible Base, and that was 2.10. By the way, this is going to be renamed Core in 2.11 and newer coming up. And we split that off from Ansible content. So the plugins, modules, and all these things that these developers are creating that need a really fast lifecycle, they need things updated very quickly, separated. So before we actually talk about that, we want to make sure that this webinar is focused on the people that are on Ansible 2.9 and not ready to move to 2.10. We know that going to 2.10 is going to save a lot of things overhead-wise, but for a lot of enterprise customers, as part of the Ansible automation platform, this is still the downstream release as part of that. And oh, by the way, Ansible 2.9 is actually going to have a much longer life cycle going forward. We haven't announced this yet, but this will be, the Ansible 2.9 as officially supported via an Ansible subscription will be supported for many, a few years after what we probably do. So expect to see that announcement coming up. But because of that, we expect that people will stay on Ansible 2.9 under the hood for quite some time. So this webinar is focused on being able to leverage collections today without having to wait for a 2.10 or a 2.11 or whatever as part of the Ansible automation platform. So I've already talked about what an Ansible collection is. And if you're not familiar with that, this is what actually is holding all of this content together. This is a new and simplified, consistent content schema that was created to help bundle, distribute all of this content together, right? So think of this as one abstraction layer above roles, modules, module utils, plugins, documentation, and being able to put that in one place, organized correctly, and then being able to build it and distribute it in a very portable and flexible manner, right? And and oh, by the way, this has its own versioning so that you're not tied, now that the collection is no longer part of the Ansible project distribution, it does need its own versioning schematic and its own versioning schema using semantic versioning or SEMVer, right? So you're going to have this, you're going to have collections now have versions, specific versions tied to them so that developers can actually manage their content on the fly very, very quickly. So start seeing that going forward. So when we start talking about content, we talk about collections, and we often like to compare this with other things in the tech industry where we talk about content, we hear about apps, right? So when you hear about the Apple App Store, you know that it's going to be things that are for an iPhone. Or if you talk about Google Play, you know those are things for Android. So when you start talking about delivery of these collections, we've already talked about the how and the what. So where are the collections actually going to be distributed? And there are two places right now. So the first is Ansible Galaxy. You should already be familiar with that. If you've been in the community for a while, that has been the de facto place to upload and download Ansible roles. Now that we have Ansible Collections, we have extended Ansible Galaxy to be able to handle Ansible collections as well. So Ansible Galaxy is the upstream place, and Automation Hub is the downstream for the actual enterprise customers that purchase the Ansible subscription as part of the Ansible automation platform. And all of these things come together as part of the Ansible automation platform. And we'll talk a little bit about delivery as well in a little bit. Okay, so, and I'm really flying through this, I'm sorry, but we have a lot to go through and we're still gonna be moving along. So collection directory, the actual collection itself is a standardized directory structure. And you can take a look at this. If you're an Ansible collection developer, you know that you can create a skeleton directory structure very, very quickly using the init command. We're not going to talk about that. That's another persona, and that's another webinar. I think we've talked about that other ways. But when you actually start using Ansible collections and you start diving into the actual directory structure, these are the things that you're actually going to start seeing. The Galaxy YAML is very important. That's the source data for the manifest JSON. You have the README. Obviously, that's the front page for the docs. And then you have certain directories that actually contain a lot of the things that you already know, right? So you actually have a docs directory. You've got a metadata directory, which is new. A playbooks directory, which is just for playbook snippets. Plugins. And by the way, don't forget modules are plugins. So modules are part of the plugins directory. You've got roles and you've got tests. Now, the one thing I do want to mention here, and I did it quickly, was the meta directory. Meta is very important for collection, right? So now you can actually add metadata per collection using the runtime.yaml file. Now we're going to talk about the runtime.yaml file throughout this. It's very important. This is actually the thing that kind of glues everything together. The runtime.yaml file actually determines everything around redirection. And we'll talk about the actual modules, right? When you actually have playbooks that use modules and they refer to modules, the modules now have to understand that they're part of a collection and that they're also part of a namespace, and we'll talk about that. So the metadata files, including runtime YAML, also include compatibility. So it actually can determine if it's coded properly to find out exactly what versions of Ansible are compatible with the actual collection. We do this for the collections that are maintained and developed by the Ansible team. So you could see a lot of those supported and certified content actually have the requires Ansible field in there. And also we have the deprecation field, where you actually show what pieces and parts of the collection are going to be deprecated. So this is actually very, very granular per collection. So before we move along, this is a nice slide that shows kind of the goal of kind of where we were with the Ansible project upstream and how it interfaced and aligned with the downstream Ansible engine release. As of Ansible 2.9, all of this sea change has actually happened for the better, obviously. So the Ansible project will continue to make an Ansible distribution that has everything included via pip, as they do today. You're familiar with the Ansible, Ansible 2.10, the actual distribution. That will move into a naming of, that actually was just announced recently that the Ansible project will move to a semver as part of its distribution methodology. So you've probably seen Ansible 2.10 as the, the community distribution. That's going to move to a semver, and that's going to be with Ansible 2. It's going to move to project 3.0, 4.0, etc. Okay, so and then once it actually works with, it's going to be as part of Ansible base. We talked about Ansible base already. This is the very foundational pieces of Ansible, and this is going to be Ansible renamed to Ansible core. So it's going to be very, very lightweight, and this is going to be the foundations for a cloud native Ansible, right? You can almost see this happening with Ansible base and Ansible core, being a very, very lightweight Ansible distribution that's going to move into a containerized downstream products. And those are going to move into obviously the Ansible automation platform, which is going to be container based. And you'll hear more about that the next major release in 2021. So we talked about runtime YAML, and this slide is complicated. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot going on with runtime.yaml, but this is where we actually talk about trying to understand where did modules and plugins go, right? As part of is part of the Ansible distribution. So when we did this migration back in March of 2020, everything that was part of 2.9, like all content part of 2.9, was going to move into collections, right? But it might not have been clear exactly what the collection names were going to be. So what we have here is a file which is for reference only. It's to help show exactly what made it into what content from 2.9 made it into collections form and was made into Galaxy. So this is actually just a good reference, and you can see an example here. So if you use the Podman image module, right, you can see that it was actually part of the containers.podman collection, and you can see the redirect there. So redirection is going to be kind of a dark art here, but it's going to be extremely important as you move forward. And the notes here will clearly identify that. So runtime.yaml is the Ansible built-in runtime you see here. This is the file that's actually going to be distributed as part of 2.10 to tell, so that when you have 2.10 installed, it tells you exactly where the things are located. Now, there's also runtime YAML as part of the collection itself, which can also assist here for 2.9. Given that Ansible 2.9 does not have this built-in runtime YAML, it actually will have to use the actual the runtime YAML as part of the collection itself. So this is extremely important. Now, and I don't want to get you hung up on this stuff, but we hope, the goal here is that things will just work, right? So in the end, when it's all said and done, if you're using content, if you're using modules in 2.9, you can continue to use your playbooks as is moving forward with collections. The fully qualified collection name, you'll see FQCN, is not required, even though it is recommended, and Sean will tell you a little bit more about that shortly. But the reason why we want you to start using fully qualified collection names is because you do need them for net new content, right? You do need that if you're using Ansible 2.9 and you install some collections that were originally not in 2.9, it won't know where it is, and you will have to use that fully qualified collection name, and it'll be required. So again, don't get super hung up on this. We're going to talk a little bit about recommended practices, best practices here as part of playbooks, and then we'll go from there. I'm going to hand it over to Sean, and he'll talk more, hopefully much clearer than I can, about some getting your Ansible 2.9 control nodes ready for collections, some examples, and then talking about troubleshooting and debugging. Sean?
Okay, it says you can hear me. Can you hear me? I switched mics.
I can hear you.
All right, and then just keep in mind, I saw a few questions coming through about, I think it's maybe frustration with things changing. So hopefully, Andrius addressed this, but I'm just going to repeat it, which is Red Hat is all about taking upstream open source software and making it productized and easy to use. And in this case, right, we're going to have a very long path to doing some of the things we're talking about today. So we're trying to future-proof you and make folks think about what is changing and what's happening. But hopefully people don't get scared. Like this isn't, this is like going from RHEL 7 to 8, right? Like we're not forcing, like lots of folks are still using RHEL 7. We're not forcing people to use RHEL 8. There are people that want to use the new content, and we're showing them how to do that. But if you're already making a cultural transformation within your company, this isn't going to stop anything. It's just going to give you more knobs, more options, more things to do. And one of the largest things, I think back to what Andrius showed with that kind of iPhone and Android phone, is that this allows you to move content asynchronously, meaning that if there's a bug with a module code, you can get it right away. If there's a new feature that comes out in a role, you can get it right away. And that was not something that was very easy to do, and it was non-structured before we came out with Ansible Collections. So just think of this as copying exactly like apps on your iPhone do, right? Like I don't have to upgrade my iPhone to get the newest Instagram app, right? Like it's just something that we expected in this time in industry. So with that, let's get started. We'll dive into the next slide. So There's various strategies for implementing Ansible collections. The most common that we'll be covering today are 1 and 3. So 1 is basically just using Ansible Galaxy command to install this to your runtime environment. 2, this is more common in production environments. We're not really going to get into a lot of this today, but this is basically like taking roles and including them within your source control so that you have like within your GitHub repo, for example, you might include the roles or modules per job you're doing. This allows like very granular control. We see this happening already today in certain large customers. And then 3 is kind of a dynamic way, but you can use it on the command line or in Ansible automation platform within the Tower user interface. Is you can just set up requirements YAML and it'll dynamically load multiple collections that you specify. So these are the 3 main strategies. They're not honestly in a particular order here. So I wouldn't think of this, like sometimes I'm going to show stuff in order. In this case, these are just 3 different common paths for implementing collections. And the first, look, we'll just get into the first one. So oh yeah, the next slide, he actually did a breakdown. As we're not really covering 2, you can go to the next slide, Andrius. This will just kind of visually represent it. We're just going to cover like 1 and 3. And 2 is really not that interesting. Just imagine that like I steal a role from Andrius and then I put his role within my GitHub repo. So I'm in charge of manually syncing code. I'm not automatically getting that or installing it. It's just included within my project. We can go to the next slide. So most folks are familiar, and we already showed this on a slide, that we kind of think of Galaxy as our upstream community distribution. So anyone can put content on Galaxy. Think of it as a repository of repositories. And we have done a lot of improvements on Galaxy, for example, supporting collections, but there's no guarantee or easy way to understand who put content up there. So we put our upstream projects up there, but anyone has access to this. And it's not to say it's bad, it's just that it becomes really clear why we created Automation Hub. Automation Hub is like RHEL and Galaxy is like Fedora. So Automation Hub makes it very easy for our customers who do care about using supported content. So this content being what Andrius showed, modules, playbooks, roles, built like plugins, like any type of plugin, to a filter plugin, to a connection plugin. So the Galaxy, right, is our upstream Automation Hub. You know, if you use content from Automation Hub, that you can get us on the phone, you have a throat to choke, or what we like to say, a hand to shake, and there's insurance basically on that content. So you know that that's like the blessed content. If anyone's gone into Galaxy and searched Nginx, for example, you'll get a million results, right? It's a very popular open source project. But if you want the product part that's supported by, now F5 owns them, with a joint support contract with F5 and Red Hat, you can know that you're using Automation Hub. You can go to the next slide. So you saw it on the previous slide. We do Ansible Galaxy collection install on the name, and I'm going to show some more examples of that. But it's not clear to folks, I think, how you set up multiple. Where are you installing from? And I saw a question go by earlier that probably got answered already, but for everyone's sake, you can set up a multiple, what we call a Galaxy server, or just think of it as a collection repository. So in this case, I have this is a variable called server list. This is a built-in variable. So this is the one you need to use. And then it reads this in order: Automation Hub, my org hub, release, Galaxy. So in this case, it's saying I'm going to use content. I'm going to look for content first to install from Automation Hub. Then I'm going to look at my org, and then I'm going to look at Galaxy. So this allows you to always choose Automation Hub first, then your org or Galaxy. And you may want to change that order. So it's just literally reading that in from like left to right in order. And then each server is defined below. So Galaxy Automation Hub is pointing to Automation Hub. We just made the names match. And then you can put your token in. You would actually get your token from cloud.redhat.com. My private hub, so we released as part of platform 1.2 last month. Or was it October? I'm trying to remember when the release was. You can just go on our ansible.com/blog and look at the release. So private Automation Hub is a self-hosted option. So I've been trying not to say on premises, because I don't care if it's on premise or in a public cloud or wherever you want to host it. So I'm just saying self-hosted, meaning like this is something running on your infrastructure versus us running it. So Private Automation Hub can sync to Galaxy. It can sync to Automation Hub and pull certified or upstream community content, but it also allows organizations to share content with each other. So if there's content you don't want upstreams to share with other folks, you can put it on there and kind of, it has some governance in it as well. So you can like approve content to go out to the other teams, then point Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform like clusters to this Private Automation Hub, and you can have multiple of them. So here I just have one. So it's just installing that collection, that content from these in order. And then if it doesn't exist in Private Hub or Automation Hub, you can use blessed community content as well. We're not trying to handcuff or make Galaxy less useful, but just kind of give options here from certified content versus community content versus your own curated content that you're self-hosting. You can go to the next slide. Also wanted to bring up, this is a question in there as well, and I think it got answered, but how do you know where lookups are happening? And by default in 2.9, this is happening in your home directory Ansible Collections, and then it's looking in user share Ansible Collections. And then this is configurable within your Ansible configuration file. So for example, if you wanted to use collections in a local directory, you could just add that to the path, and you can reorder this in your Ansible configuration to also look up where I'm using collections. So if you had that same collection or different versions of a collection installed locally, instead of pointing to the newest collection, you could do testing within your organization, say like, hey, this is the blessed collection for doing Cisco iOS, or this is the blessed collection for doing AWS provisioning, and then just point to that and then hard code it within your testing. And then your CI/CD pipelines, your GitOps, you can basically just keep revving up. So not only can you pin playbooks within projects, is you can actually pin content, pin modules, and you're no longer really tied to that Ansible base or Ansible core version. It just becomes, it's still important, but it's just less important because you're moving content all the time. And then again, think the use case here, right, is that it's going to be the amount we're revving Ansible base is going to go down. It used to be 4 times a year. It's going to be like twice a year. So you want updates to your content more than twice a year. Like Cisco operating systems get new features or bug fixes. You want that, your modules to reflect that. So this is something you want to have. We're not trying to create more work for folks. It's just a way, again, to like mirror what you have with any application on anything. Just think in this case, it's content, and content is playbooks. You can go to the next slide. So again, to kind of reiterate on the precedence of like how it does lookup, by default, it's just going to look in your home folder. So when you do Ansible Galaxy install, and again, I'll show this on some subsequent slides, it's basically going to download that collection from wherever you specified. By default, it's just Galaxy if you install community upstream. And then it installs it in your home directory in a hidden folder, .ansible, just kind of hides it. You just do ls/la. And then another folder called Ansible Collections. And then all your Ansible Collections content is in there. And then there's a top level as well. So on rel, for example, it's just pointing to user share Ansible Collections. So it's going to look up in that order. So if you have it not in the first one and you have it in the second one, this is kind of like we have user control versus admin control. It's like system control versus a specific project. It allows you some granularity to configure this. And then again, you can add more to that or use neither of those. It's all configurable within Ansible CFG. Next slide. So I said I would show it. So that's why I wasn't concerned with kind of diving in before, is if I want to install a collection, there's a command line utility. And this is kind of like step 1, right? Is there's a command line utility I can do Ansible-Galaxy collection install, and then the collection name, which is namespace.collection. So Arista actually has multiple collections. In this case, I'm installing Arista's EOS collection, which is their operating system or platform operating system for multiple network switches. I think the other one's cloud platforms or something. I have to look back at the naming of it. I can also install specific versions on the command line. So if I know there's a certain version that I've standardized at a large enterprise and I really care about versioning, I know some folks don't care about versioning and other people swear by it. They're very particular about what they're running, is you just put colon and then the version on the collection. And both in Automation Hub and Galaxy, you can do drop downs and see all the different version numbers. So it's fairly easy to navigate. And you can see in the actual output there, it shows you where it installed it. So users on Ansible Collections, Amazon AWS. And it also has the version number as well in there. And if you go into that folder, you can cat the Galaxy YAML file and you'll get that same information. A Galaxy YAML file was described earlier in the presentation. It's just a syntax version, like a key value version of how it's getting indexed within Galaxy and Automation Hub, or your private Automation Hub for that matter. You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, real quick, hey, we know that it was a bug in the server list earlier, so thank you all for mentioning that. We will get that fixed when we actually post the slides. Thanks.
Oh yeah, thank you. Me and Andrius, a lot of the deck didn't exist 3 days ago. We kept honing in on this because we know this is good material to get, and we want the community and our customers to get a lot of this. So one of the questions I get, and I wanted to just attack, is just getting verbosity out there. Is you can see in this example, I just highlighted this when you put full verbosity on there, is where it's installing from. So there's ways to see where it came from later, but you can also see while you're installing it, if you put verbosity up, is it saying collection ansible.tower is not available from Galaxy, so it will get it from Automation Hub. So in this case, my server list, the way I install it, I must have, for this example, I put Galaxy first, then Automation Hub. And then I used a collection, ansible.tower, that only exists in the downstream product. It doesn't exist in Galaxy. There's an upstream version of it called awx.awx. So in this case, I wanted to use a certified collection because I know for this mythical account, right, that I am wanting that insurance. And there's a bug fix on that hasn't made it upstream yet, for example. I'm just hypothetical here. So I can install from either place. So this is just showing that it's fairly easy to see that output. It kind of runs by real quick in verbosity, but if you want to see that, it's there and it's logged. You can go to the next slide. So we covered part one. Part one's just using Ansible, like installing it to your runtime environment. So using the Ansible Galaxy command line tools to install it. So there's actually another way to do this, and I saw some questions earlier. I'm not looking at the questions currently because Andrius is handling that, but it was about requirements. So requirements.yaml kind of automates this a bit, which we like to do with Red Hat Ansible Automation. And what we do here is you have to have a directory within your project called collections. And within that directory, you have a file that has to be called requirements.yaml. And this file has to be obviously YAML format. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. What's really cool with Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform within Tower is that it will auto install all these collections. That's a mode you can do. You can go to the next slide, Andrius. And this allows you to pin versions, point to different servers or repositories, right? So in here, community.aws in this example is pointing to Galaxy, and Amazon.ws is pointing to Galaxy, and Ansible Tower is pointing at Automation Hub. And then this kitchen sink one down here, I'm making fun of Andrius down here, is on his private Automation Hub server, which could be on the open internet. It doesn't really matter, and I could authenticate to it. So I can now install all of these. So this dynamically loads in Tower, and you can put all your credentials in Tower, or you can do this on the command line. So you can actually, you can go to the next slide, is this collections file. If you're just using command line Ansible, you can just do Ansible Galaxy install and then point to the requirements. And then what it'll do is it'll go through each of those key value pairs and install them. So instead of having to run the install command once, twice, 3 times, you can just grab them all. And then I actually should have made a slide on this. If your collection requires other collections, that's actually in that Galaxy YAML file. So it will take care of that as well, is that if you have a collection that depends on another collection, and you actually see that here, that's what jogged my memory, is that net common is a requirement for a network. In this case, I think it's a requirement of AWS one, which is kind of interesting. I got to go look at that. So net common is a collection. It's like a library collection used by other collections, and in this case, it required it, so it went ahead and installed it. So that's also possible, where your collection, your project may require multiple collections, multiple modules and playbooks and things that you want to grab from either Automation Hub or Galaxy. And those collections may have requirements that are collections, and that's just kind of abstracted from you. So you don't really have to worry about that, but it might be interesting to folks developing collections more than just folks using collections, which is when you're developing a collection, you can make use of other collections and have it all install on one command. It's super easy. You can go to the next slide. So the next slide is an example, just some practical examples to maybe help folks get their brains thinking about what possibilities are here. So in this one, I grabbed CyberArk. So there's two methods, and I'm gonna deep dive a little bit. So listen to the words and hopefully not just read the slide. Is if I'm on Ansible 2.9 or 2.10, I don't have to do this at all to use CyberArk stuff. I still have the batteries included model. So just to repeat that, don't freak out and think you have to do this right away if you just have it working already. And hopefully this will stick, is I just don't want people getting anxious or getting upset or thinking they have to change things that are already in production and working. If you have Ansible 2.9 and 2.10, this will just work. On the left will work. Now, let's say CyberArk makes a bug improvement and you do want to use collections. There's an easy way you can do this without using the fully qualified collection name. And that is putting the word collections as a top level play parameter. And then you put the collection you want. And then you don't have to do a fully qualified collection name, which we're going to show in the next example. So why would you want to do this? Again, if the module has a bug fix, a feature, or a new module or role becomes available, then you would want to grab that asynchronously. So the only time you would have to make that change is if you're trying to get new net functionality right now. Now, in the future, you'll have to use collections no matter what, but you don't have to worry about that this year. And in this example, it's creating, CyberArk does credential management and all kinds of different things, and their partners. I just thought it would be a great example. And it's creating a session that's used by subsequent modules and just creating a user on this CyberArk PAS. You can go to the next slide. So the next slide I'm going to cover is showing the second example. Now this is actually recommended. So this is, instead of using the collections parameter at the top level, I'm just going to use what we call an FQCN, or fully qualified collection name. So in this case, I use cyberark.pas.cyberark authentication for that module. Now, why do I recommend this? This future-proofs you probably until you don't use Ansible anymore in 2050. Like this will future-proof you for such a long time that you won't care anymore about any little changes we're making to the back end. I can't promise 2050, I'm just joking, but it'll probably be a very, 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 very long time, because I can't really imagine how else you would extend this. So the reason you want to do this, besides just future-proofing yourself, is that that collections parameter at the top level doesn't follow plays into subsequent roles. So you could use the collections top level parameter, but you would have to edit another run, the file Andrius referred to earlier, the run YAML file, the runtime YAML file, and edit that because each role could have collection lookups that are different. Now, even if you did that, the problem happens is, what about module collision? And that's why I really recommend doing fully qualified collection names, is collision. What if I have two module names that are the same? Because I no longer have collection and name lookup. If I have module collision, that's when I have another problem. And then you can see here, right now it's not a problem because the modules have ridiculous names. The module is called CyberArk authentication. So I have cyberark.pas.cyberark authentication. So what you are going to start seeing is we're going to have cyberark.pas.authentication. And that's where you could hit collisions like in 2021. So this is why it future-proofs you. And you'll actually notice in network stuff, we're already making it really easy where it's like cisco.ios.l3 interfaces. That's our plan, is to start simplifying this. So it only honestly looks weird to existing Ansible users that just haven't seen it yet. Where this functionality, if you come at this with a green, like a green field, and you've never seen it before, this isn't that hard. It's not really that big a deal. And again, don't freak out. Like, this is in Ansible 2.9, this isn't changing for months and months and months and months and months. So it's not something we're trying to force someone like, you should have done this last week. Like, that's not the goal here. We're trying to be onward and upward, right? Not worry about screwing people over. We can move on to the next example. So we're going to do another example, and this is near and dear to my heart, is we're going to do some network automation. And me and Andrius do a lot of network automation. But then keep in mind, like, all these same methodologies and rules apply to, it doesn't matter. It's all collections. Collections are all use cases across Ansible. And go ahead and move into the example. I think we're still doing on time, so hopefully I'm not going too fast. So the same idea. In this example, we're configuring an interface on a single switch. So not even that really Ansible-y, but I just wanted to create a really simple example to showcase this. Is I have one switch, I'm going to configure an IP address on a port on that switch. Now, if I want to use the collections, I can just put collections and then update that collection. And then if there happen to be a bug fix, I can now take advantage of that collection rather than using the built-in module that's built into that install of Ansible. Super easy. There is risk. I actually removed the risk on the other slide, but risk means like 2021, right? Let's just put it in perspective. Is don't worry too much if you're not taking advantage of collections yet. It's more of something you can take advantage of, whether something you have to take advantage of. You can move to the next slide. So here, again, I'm putting the fully qualified name, arista.eos.eos-l3 interfaces. And again, this is a great example of where collision could happen, because eventually, and it's actually possible now with the newest collection, is I don't have to put EOS L3 interfaces. I can put arista.eos.l3 interfaces. And that makes a lot of sense, is it's the Arista namespace, the EOS collection, and the L3 interfaces module. However, there's also a Cisco.ios.l3 interfaces. So that is a reason why we recommend using the fully qualified collection name, is that we're going to simplify this over time. So every module, like the fully qualified collection name, it's a big one. That's why we say FQCN, is simplified, and it makes a lot of sense. So the only reason there's any awkwardness at all, honestly, is because we're transitioning from one way of doing it to the new way of doing it. And hopefully that will make sense. Is, again, I recommend, if you're building new Ansible content, to use the fully qualified collection name. And honestly, don't worry about stuff you've already made right now. If you want to, that's fine, and we have paths to doing that. But just think of new content I'm making, and I want to use collections. Just start using the fully qualified collection name. You can go to the next slide. Now, there's one really interesting thing I wanted to cover for network automation, is that we take advantage of different connection plugins. So there's a netconf, there's HTTP API for using APIs, and there's also network CLI, where we can connect to like a basic network terminal on a Arista or Cisco switch. And these also get updated by collections. So it's the same idea, is I'm using the Ansible.netcom.network CLI, and then I need to tell that network connection plugin what type of device this is. So we say I'm arista.eos.eos. Now that's part of the reason right there, is that's a bit awkward, arista.eos.eos, but that's why we're recommending using fully qualified collection names, is that we can get rid of that awkwardness over time. We're just trying to make sure we can have our cake and eat it too, or we're backwards compatible with existing automation, so we're not kind of driving our community or customers crazy, but we can also provide this net new functionality and content to customers that want to move faster, or distribute new content, or take advantage of features and bug fixes faster than they could with Ansible command line releases. You can go to the next slide. So we'll cover some basic debugging and troubleshooting of these collections, because I think this will help folks. And again, these are in the docs as well. You can move to the next slide. So 3 levels of verbosity will show you where it's loading that module from. So if you have an existing Playbook and you're just curious, you only need 3 levels of verbosity, triple V, and you can actually see on the command line, hey, it's loading this from Ansible Collections. So if you install a collection and then you want to verify, is this actually using the collection or is it using built-in? You can just use 3 levels of verbosity and grab it. And I removed all the other output. So you could just grep for that module name if you really wanted to, just grep for L3 interfaces. And then you could grab where it's loading it from. You can go to the next slide. So kind of just messing around, quad Vs are going to let you look at a little bit higher level or a deeper level for connection plugins. So specifically for network automation or APIs, think APIs to like public cloud, like Amazon or Google Compute platform or Azure, right? Azure is a huge one, or IBM Cloud, or think of API to a specific device like an F5 Big IP or Cisco NX API. You might want to use a connection plugin that also has a bug fix, feature update, or et cetera, right? So we can do a quad 4 Vs. We'll look at connection diagnostics, and you can see where it's loading that CLI plugin from. You can go to the next slide. And then we have some resources and tools. And then again, the reason we put these in here is not for you to take notes and memorize this. We will get the slides that everyone, as Andrius said, and I saw that question go by a few times. So you'll be able to grab these slides and just click on this documentation. So one of the things we've been asked is, since all content, and content includes modules, is being moved into collections, how do I know where the documentation is now? And a lot of folks have probably already noticed when they Google whatever specific module, when they do a web search, if I want to be more abstract, they already have noticed this. But there's a instead of the module index that folks might have been used to in the past, there's a collection index. So you can go to docs.ansible.com, Ansible latest collections. You will notice a little bit of awkwardness there. Is 2.10 Ansible is actually not part of our product. That's upstream. So you'll see a little warning in there, and that's something we're working on and making the docs very clear. What is product, what is upstream? There's no plan to make it harder for the community to use Ansible. It's just being really clear what is downstream and what is upstream, what is product supported, what is moving fast in community. So right now, whether it's a product or upstream, if you want to see all the collections in one place, you can go to that docs. You can also look at it in Automation Hub if you're a customer. And you can also see this in Private Automation Hub if you sync that content. You can go to the next slide. There's also a user guide specifically for collections. It covers a lot of the same things that we covered today. How to install a collection, where to put it in. I tried to make sure I showed a couple different examples than what they had, just to mix it up and hopefully provide more content. This also shows a lot of command line Ansible. I think me and Andrius are going to do a separate talk at some point with the platform. There's a lot of advantages and minor differences when you're using the product. Is you can handle all the credentials and tokens within Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform and then assign those. It's the same idea where you're just saying, I want to use content from Private Automation Hub, then Automation Hub, then Galaxy, for example. And then Tower will automatically sync requirements files. So it's all the same ideas. It's just kind of up-leveling that for an enterprise, so that experience is really easy for a team of folks that are doing automation versus a couple individuals just sharing on the command line Ansible. You can go to the next slide. A couple minor commands that I think will be helpful. If you're on upstream Ansible 2.10, you can list all collections that are installed and it'll show where they are. So you can do Ansible collection list. This is not a command that's available in 2.9, just FYI, in case it's not on your machine. This is helpful for just understanding what's on your machine and where it is, if you want to dive in and look at it. You can go to the next slide. And you can also list a specific collection. So imagine, like the previous example only showed 6 collections, but imagine you had 65 collections installed. You might just want to look at one specific collection and where it's installed on your system. And you can see here, this is important because if I look up, like this is a great example, this one's actually stolen from the docs, is that the version it's going to use first is 1.0.1, where the newer version, I don't know if it's the newest, is in their user share Ansible. So it's going to use by default 1.0.1, and that might not be the intended the intent of the person that's using that content. They may want to install a newer version or reverse in their Ansible CFG file to use the 106. So this is an example of troubleshooting. You might want to jump in, look at that specific collection and see which one you're using. In this order, it's listing these in order of how it's doing that lookup. You go to the next slide. So again, don't feel like you have to take notes. We'll put the slides on ansible.com, but there's a bunch of links here, including the developer's guide for folks that are creating collections or creating modules. There's a blog post that goes into more detail. There's a developer community. There's a mailing list called the Bullhorn. There's lots and lots of webinars. So every time we do a webinar like this, we make sure it's on demand. We know that even though Andrius and myself are on the East Coast time, we want to make sure that we reach as many people as we can. So we make sure it's on demand, that so other geos can reach it and you can share with folks on your team. And then we have self-paced workshops and content there. And then you can go to the last slide and we'll look at questions. And I guess my last plug on the thank you slide, Andrius, would be our YouTube channel. Is we realize in the global pandemic that we want to figure out new ways to reach content to customers and community. So something we're trying to do is put a lot more emphasis on a digital content. So if you look at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnsibleAutomation, subscribe, follow, like, whatever, and you can also follow us on Twitter. And then as you saw on the first slide, all our Twitter handles are available up there as well. Oh, Andrius, if you had anything else to add.
No, this is awesome. I know, and we had a lot here. We've got a lot of questions, and I will make sure that all the questions are answered as part of an FAQ that we publish. So, you know, a lot of this is going to be trying to figure out what do you have to change and what don't you have to change, and we completely understand that. And our goal is to really make sure that we really want to make sure that you all are comfortable with collections first and foremost, because next year I've hinted in chat of this idea of execution environments. That's the next big thing, right? And execution environments is the next wave of distributing. Instead of having virtual environment like a vEnd, a virtual environment of Ansible, which is very, very kludgy, you have an execution environment, which is very specific and made for you know, portability in a cloud and containerized world. But in order to leverage that, you will have to know what collections are in this future world, right? So as we move forward with how Ansible is going to be, you know, distributed as part of the downstream product, and how developers actually develop their content on their, you know, on their laptop, they will have to understand execution environments. But a dependency for that is collections. So we really want to make sure for the next few months that we provide you all with all the information about collections in the world you know today, and then get you ready for the world tomorrow, which is going to be next year. That sounds like a Spaceballs reference. But anyway, yeah, so that's the way we're going to move forward. We're actually out of time, and I'm not going to actually take any questions since we are literally out of time, but I will make sure that we answer all the questions. We'll put it in a PDF or a blog and get this published. The slides will be made available. The audio will be made available as part of the webinar, the webinars resources webinar section of Ansible.com, and all registration. Anyone who registered for this webinar will get notified of the replays. So we make sure you get that. So with that, I want to say thank you to Sean, thank you to Anshul answering questions, and thank you to you all for joining in a crazy year, and we hope that 2021 will be at least as good as better than this year. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Take care.